This car shouldn't exist anymore. Most of the 12 Mercedes-Benz 540K Special Roadsters ever built were destroyed, lost to war, or left to rot in forgotten barns. But one survivor made it to a workshop floor, stripped down to nothing but rust and broken dreams. The 540K Special Roadster wasn't just transportation, it was a statement built during an era when excess meant something, when craftsmanship wasn't a marketing buzzword but an expectation. These machines rolled out of Stuttgart between 1936 and 1940 with supercharged inline-8 engines and coachwork that made people stop and stare. They were expensive then. They're priceless now. This particular car arrived as a shell. Decades of neglect had done their work. The chrome that once gleamed like liquid silver was pitted and flaking. Body panels that had been hand-formed by master craftsmen were now buckled and torn. And that legendary engine? Seized solid. Every rubber component had deteriorated into black dust. The interior looked like something pulled from a shipwreck. But here's what makes this restoration different from slapping fresh paint on a classic car. You can't just order replacement parts for a 540K Special Roadster. There's no catalog, no warehouse full of reproduction panels. Almost everything has to be fabricated from scratch, using techniques that barely exist anymore. The team started where every proper restoration begins, complete disassembly. Every nut, every bolt, every component logged and photographed. What looked like a car became thousands of individual pieces spread across workshop tables. Some parts crumbled at the touch. Others came apart only after days of patient work with penetrating oil and heat. The chassis told its own story. Corrosion had eaten through sections at the frame rails. These aren't parts you replace with modern steel and call it done. The original metal had specific properties, specific thickness, specific characteristics that contributed to how the car handled and felt. Matching that meant sourcing period-correct materials or fabricating new pieces that precisely duplicated the originals. Then came the engine work. Extracting a seized supercharged straight 8 that's been sitting motionless for decades requires patience most people don't have. The supercharger itself, that magnificent piece of engineering that gave the 540K its intoxicating power delivery, was a puzzle of worn components and obsolete technology. Every bearing surface needed measuring. Every tolerance needed checking against factory specifications from 80 years ago. The body presented its own nightmare. Hand-formed aluminum panels don't respond well to standard metalworking techniques. Too much heat, and they warp. Too much pressure, and they tear. The craftsmen working on this restoration had to relearn skills that died with the original coach builders. They studied old photographs, examined surviving examples, and practiced on scrap metal before touching the actual car. What nobody tells you about restorations at this level is the detective work involved. Original paint samples get analyzed under microscopes to determine exact color formulation. Trim pieces get X-rayed to understand their internal construction. Even the leather for the interior required tracking down tanneries, still using traditional methods that produce the right texture and smell. And we haven't even talked about the chrome yet. Modern chrome plating looks too perfect, too bright, too obviously new. The original pieces had a specific depth and warmth that came from different processes. Replicating that meant finding specialists who still understood pre-war plating techniques. This is where the real challenge begins. The chrome work alone consumed 6 months, each piece stripped, examined, repaired, and replated using methods that most modern shops have never heard of. The bumpers required straightening by hand because machine tools would create stress points that didn't exist in the original metalwork. Every mounting bracket, every trim strip, every seemingly minor component got the same obsessive attention. While that progressed, the engine finally surrendered its secrets. The block showed surprisingly little wear once they got past the surface corrosion. The crankshaft cleaned up within tolerance, but the supercharger, that glorious mechanical compressor that whined like a banshee at full throttle, needed complete reconstruction. The rotors had to be rebalanced to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The housing required welding repairs so precise that X-rays couldn't detect the joins. Then there's the wood. People forget these cars had structural wood in their bodies, ash frames that supported the aluminum panels. Finding properly aged ash with the right grain structure meant searching through specialty lumber yards for weeks. Each piece had to be shaped using hand tools because modern routers cut too aggressively and splinter the wood differently than period equipment. The paint process would make a perfectionist weep. Not the modern base coat, clear coat system that makes everything look like plastic. This required traditional methods, multiple coats of primer, each one block sanded by hand until the surface felt like glass under your fingertips. Then the color coats, applied with techniques that haven't been standard practice since craftsmen wore lab coats in factory paint booths. Between coats, days of curing, no rushing, no shortcuts. The final finish needed to have depth, not just shine. You should be able to look into the paint and see layers, see richness that modern finishes can't replicate no matter how many clear coats you stack on top. Reassembly became an exercise in automotive archaeology. Every component went back exactly where it came from, oriented precisely as the factory had installed it. Wire routing followed original patterns. Fasteners were torqued to specifications from engineering documents written before computers existed. The team even replicated the factory assembly sequence because these cars were designed to go together in a specific order. The interior stitching pattern alone required 3 attempts before it matched photographic evidence from period advertisements. The carpet backing had to be sourced from a mill in England still producing automotive materials using looms from the same era. Even the sound-deadening material got researched and replicated. 2 years after that pile of parts first arrived, the engine fired. Not a quick test. A proper break-in procedure that would have been followed in 1939. Gradual warm-up cycles, careful monitoring of every system. The supercharger whine building as the engine came up to temperature sounded exactly right, exactly as it should. What you're seeing isn't just a restored car, it's a working time machine, a functional piece of history rebuilt with such precision that engineers from 1939 could perform a factory inspection and find nothing out of place. This is what happens when restoration becomes obsession, when good enough isn't even considered. The 540K Special Roadster exists again, exactly as it did when it left Stuttgart 85 years ago. Every bolt torqued to original specifications, every panel formed by hand, Every surface finished to standards that don't exist anymore. This isn't preservation. It's resurrection of a craft most people assumed died decades ago. 12 were built. One just came back.